it's our number 1 through number 10 priority. It is everything to us. It's in law, it's in our mandate, it's in our blood, it's in our purpose, which is a stronger Canada delivered. And our recent investments, where we've tried to control things that are really important to us, we were pleased to open a brand new facility last year in Scarborough, the Albert Jackson Processing Center, named after our first black letter carrier in Canada back in the late 1800s. That was a huge project led by Manon Fortin, I might say, and led very well. And that is the hub of our e-commerce model across Canada. It is an amazing facility, and our service numbers have shot up quite amazingly since then. The transition, the stabilization has been incredible. Our on-time service performance numbers are the best we've ever seen in our history, and we're going for more. Manon has that as part of her goals for the next year or so. But we're getting to best-in-class level on service, and it's everything. That's what we're here for, not only in urban areas, but as we talk here, in rural and remote areas where it is even more important to those folks. I grew up in a rural area. I've lived in rural areas. I know how important the post offices are, and we're all over that.
Mr. Ettinger, a great response. Definitely agree with what you've stated. How does Canada Post measure service? What are some ways that Canada Post measures service?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we have more KPIs than you can well imagine. It's hard sometimes to keep track of them all, but service is number 1, along with safety. Manon and her team, we have dashboards. It's all pretty much real-time numbers. We'll get the numbers from the day before, the end of the day, from the last week. And so we measure on-time performance based on when the product was ordered versus when it was delivered, and it's a percentage. So it's a percentage out of 100. So if you're getting to 96, 97, 98% delivered on time, you're in the right range. And of course, you're always wanting to improve, which we do. But that's our goal, to be in that range. And it makes a big difference with our customers. Probably the single most important thing we can do, and I'm talking about major customers as well as consumers, is to be better and better with our service numbers. Right. So we spend a lot of time doing things to enhance those numbers.
Thanks. That is our time, and I appreciate Mr. Kuzmierczak bringing up the point about stamps. John Ware is certainly one of the greatest and coolest Canadians ever from Alberta. I appreciate that. I look forward to the OGGO chair stamp series as well one day.
I haven't seen that one come across my desk yet.
I appreciate the one from Mr. Ware. He is an incredible Albertan. Mrs. Vignola, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Ettinger, Madame Fortin, Madame Ratchett, I'm so happy to see you here today. I'm sorry I touched the mic. I'm sorry. I apologize to the interpreters. I'm going to come back to the nitty-gritty here. I am the critic in this area. And my colleagues come to me, what's happening with rural post offices in the North Shore, in Île-de-la-Madeleine, and elsewhere, and other areas where I would say the localities are quite central. But here are a few things that I have been told. Villages that are not merged sometimes have streets that have the same name, the same postal code. And the answer that we are given when there's a complaint from Canada Post, change the name of the street. But you understand that's a problem. It's hard to do. And you know that there have been post offices that have gone up in flames and so on. So I don't know if this is a problem just limited to the post office or just the security in general. And in northern Quebec, there's another problem. There are more people but not enough postal boxes. So you might have 2 or 3 families sharing the same post office box, and it is a problem in terms of confidentiality for the mail that they get. And for people who live in the north, they don't get service in their mother tongue. That is one of your mandates. That's part of your mandate. And you know, or at least I hope so, you know the problem of transporting medication in the North Shore, the Lower North Shore, and certain areas in Quebec where there are very few, if any, roads. And Île-de-la-Madeleine, where they have to get all types of supplies, even school supplies, sent by post because there's no other way of getting them. So does Canada Post have a solution in mind for this type of problem, how to solve this problem in the future?
Well, thank you very much. There's 2 or 3 questions in there. I appreciate that. And I'm going to pass it over to Manon Fortin. Again, she is responsible for operations. She's very close to it. But I will say before I do that, that again, it's service, service, service. And that is our number one priority. That's where the majority of our resources go. And we've never had better numbers than we have right now. But there are areas that can be better. So Manon, over to you.
Thank you, Doug, et merci à Madame Vignola.
Thank you, Madame Vignola, for your question. I'm just going to say, as said my president, that what we try to do, we strive to offer the best possible service everywhere in Canada, in all corners of Canada. Mail delivered at home, the 3,000 mail trucks that are constantly on Canada's roads, and all the post offices that we have here, half of which are in rural areas. Generally, we do good work. But as you have pointed out, it does happen that there are exceptions. I'm not specifically aware of problems with Saint-Hyacinthe, but I do know that there were other problems in your riding. It does happen that there can be service delays or if, for example, the weather's bad and, say, an airplane can't take off or land because of that. And we do try to find the solution with the communities that are directly affected by what you outlined. We normally do get the problem solved. Are you talking about Kuujjuaq? Well, yes, Kuujjuaq is a good example. As I remember, there are quite a number 24 or so postal boxes that are required, that they are lacking, and we want to be able to solve this as quickly as possible. We're working on it very hard. Yes, we know throughout the world that there are also similar problems in countries like ours. But are there international examples that you could cite, that you could follow to improve the postal service here in our own country, in Canada?
Before you start, you have just about 20 seconds, so if you can be brief.
I deal with the CEOs of most of the postal organizations around the world. So we're constantly talking about innovations, what they're doing. One of our biggest challenges in Canada, on a big picture point of view, is it's this vast piece of land that we love and have, and with low population density. So it's really a logistics challenge to connect all that on a daily basis. I think it's kind of amazing what we're able to do in terms of 17.4 million. But as Manon said, we do make mistakes. We need to hear about those, and we will follow up on those accordingly because we want our customers to be happy, particularly in rural and remote areas. So we're committed to that. We've been there all along for the rural areas, and we're going to continue to be there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Edinger, for being here. In 1994, the Liberal government promised that no more rural post offices would close. How many rural post offices has Canada Post closed since that time?
Well, look, I joined about 5 years ago, but I know that there are a number that have closed. I will say this, though.
Do you know the number?
Well, I've heard there's 600 that's been closed in the last 30 years. Yes. And so, look, our approach on the post office is we want to keep them. We don't want to close them. We do everything we can to our number one goal is to replace the postmaster. And so we work with the communities, but sometimes we can't find a solution despite everything. And you represent a riding that's rural in northern BC, and I appreciate the challenges of all that. But I'd say, like, for example, in the last 5 years, we've been able to replace 90% of the ones that came up where there was something that happened where the postmaster either was retiring or moving away or the lease was terminated or whatever. We've been able to fill 90% of those. So there's some that are outside our control that we can't solve. In fact, the charter back in 1994 contemplated that there would be some things that would be outside of our control. But I think, look, we got more post offices than Tim Hortons and McDonald's combined.
But we're losing them all the time. We lost 33 last year. We lost 25 in 2022.
Yes.
Now, I've been involved in working with your team to try to get post offices reestablished, and your team on the ground does good work. But the starting wage for a rural postmaster is $18.44 an hour. Mm-hmm. The rent that you pay, the stipend, which covers rent, it covers snow removal, it covers insurance, all of these things, $1,357 a year. Is the fact that Canada Post offers such poor compensation to rural postmasters part of the problem when it comes to recruiting and replacing postmasters? Is that what's driving this disturbing trend of rural post offices closing?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. It's an important question. Again, we want to remain in rural and remote Canada. We do not want it to be left behind. So it's our goal to replace every single one of them. But yeah, we shared the salary ranges and so on, and it goes as high as 30, depending on the size of the community and the volumes and so on. But it's worked. It's worked, and I'm not saying it's perfect, and at some point maybe.
But it's not working because we're seeing post offices closed every single year, and part of the reason they're closing is because Canada Post is not recognizing the importance of those roles with a compensation package that is able to recruit people in rural communities. Yeah. I don't know many people in rural communities in northern BC that are willing to work for $18.44 an hour. These are federal employees that are handling the mail.
Yes.
Like, how is it possible that and where do you get market rent for $1,357 a year? You know what's happening? Those rural postmasters are taking those jobs because they know how vital the post office is to their communities. And the information we have is that they're paying out of pocket to keep your post offices open. Like, they shouldn't have to have a bake sale to deliver federal services in rural communities across Canada. This is on your watch. How are you allowing this to happen?
I appreciate that. It's a good point. Again, it's worked over time. I think we've been pretty darn successful in replacing them. The world has changed. Canada's changed in the last 30 years. What are we now? 40 million people versus 25 million. It's hard to keep to get and attract and retain people in rural areas. I think we all know that. It's unfortunate, and oftentimes we're the last building standing. So we really want to stay there. We're not trying to get out of it. I'd like to see.
One of the ways you can attract and retain people is by paying them more than minimum wage. Well, I would offer that. This challenge, it's been going on for a long time. We've lost 600 post offices since 1994. Every year, the minister sends the person in your role a letter of expectation. Has a minister ever expressed concern about the loss of rural post offices in a letter of expectation? Specifically express concern?
I believe it's been mentioned. I can't, don't have them all top of mind, but I believe in the mandate letters it's been talked about in terms of rural post offices. Absolutely, and it's important to me, so it didn't bother me that it was in there. I support it. By the way, this is all in negotiations right now with the Postmasters Union, the CPAA, so I really can't be inappropriate for me to talk any further about it because those discussions are active as we're talking here. But we're concerned about this, so we're not, as I said, we want to fill these positions.
So the post office in Dease Lake in northern BC, very small community, was closed. Canada Post contracted out the services to the band. And the band is now having to subsidize the operation of the post office to the tune of about $30,000 per year. They want to give that service back to Canada Post. They want Canada Post to reopen the Canada Post post office in that community. Are you willing to do that?
Well, again, I'll just say that this service is very important to us. Rural, remote, northern. We're sending today 300 charter airplanes into the north every week to service the remote and rural post offices. We're so proud of that, but I can tell you we're probably losing money on every bit of that, but it's the right thing to do, the right thing for Canadians, and we're proud to do it.
Thank you very much.
So we're committed
that is our
to
time, I'm afraid. Perhaps we can get to it next round. Mrs. Cusi, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Edinger, and to you and your team for being here today. Mr. Edinger, in Canada, the theft of mail is an indictable offense under Section 356 of the Criminal Code and carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in jail or a $5,000 fine. I'm sure, as you well know, certainly not an offense to be taken lightly. And I am someone who has been a victim of mail theft before, so I have a significant appreciation for how deeply this can affect a Canadian. I had portraits that I was waiting for taken from my mailbox at one point in time. So this is not a small crime, nor is it taken lightly under the criminal code. So therefore, do you think that $500 is a significant enough penalty for a member of Parliament who is admitted to stealing mail from Canadians?
Well, I think, let me just say this, the sanctity and the security of the mail is critical to us. In fact, we have a whole department of security that reports to Manon Fortin that is engaged on a 24/7 basis. We have a control center here in Ottawa. We have eyes on all of our facilities across Canada, and mail theft and stealing CMBs, community mailboxes, and others continues to be a problem. So we're very concerned about that. We're watching and dealing with that closely. Whether $500 is appropriate, I think, is up to politicians to decide. Really, it's not my decision, but it is. The way we look at the mail is just that it's critical, and we do everything we can to protect it from being stolen. But there are cases where that happens. We work closely also with the RCMP and other law enforcement agencies, and we have good contacts with them. So we're integrated really with them when things are happening. They help us, we help them, and so on. So, but in terms of the 500, I won't comment on that. I don't think it's my purview.
So I'm very glad to hear of the security measures that you are taking in an effort to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But we do have another election coming up within 18 months. Are you concerned that this might occur again, given that it has occurred in the most recent election? Does that concern you? And do you think it might be a possibility?
Well, of course, anything's possible. But while I'm extremely focused, and as a team and our security team are focused on this to ensure that it doesn't become a problem, and we do have issues, I get a nightly report on across the country what security issues have occurred the night before, and there are issues there. But I believe we have it under control. I don't think it's at a level that will threaten, well, it won't threaten an election. There is no issue in that regard from my standpoint and everything I'm seeing. And it's never been an issue that internally has been raised to us, as an extreme situation. It's under control. We have a good team. A lot of the team are ex-RCMP or ex-military, and that's one of the reasons why we have such good communications with those law enforcement groups.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Of course, as Conservatives, we're always very concerned about the good use of taxpayers' dollars and are always interested as to where their money goes. I'm seeing in a response from the appearance of your last colleague that there are 408 employees currently at Canada Post who are classified as executives. Could you please share with the committee the total number of executives out of those 408 who earned bonuses this last year, please?
Well, we have, let me just say this. Let me put it in context first and foremost. Our payroll annually is $4 billion with a B. That's just salary and wages. We also have another billion, I'm rounding here, in benefits, so a total of $5 billion. So it's $10 million a day. It is huge. And we do have a bonus program. It's called CTI, and it was developed back in, I think, 2010, 2011, and it's for all employees. And it's never paid out a dime in its history because our financials prevented that.
Thanks. That is our time.
Thank you. Thank you
Mr.
very
Sousa,
much.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Edinger, for being here today. You spoke earlier about the excitement of going to an unveiling of a stamp. In 2003, I did attend one of the unveilings of your very first mail carrier for Canada, Pedro de Silva. In 1693, he was the first in New France to deliver mail from Quebec City to Montreal, and he was celebrated. He's actually on a plaque in your office in Montreal outside. And it was unveiled in the 50th anniversary of the Portuguese when they first came to Canada through an arranged agreement with Canada and Portugal in 1953, Pier 21 in Halifax. My dad was on that very first boat. And so for us, the community was very, very excited about this anniversary stamp, as well as acknowledging this individual as having been a Portuguese immigrant back in 1693 to deliver mail. So thank you for that, and thank you for the acknowledgement for the community. Public's PSPC, an official, came to this committee back in April 8th, 2024, and talked about the similarities of the challenges Canada's facing, as is Australia. And the response was that we need to be more creative. You spoke about the 5 recommendations you've made. One of them is to refresh the regulatory approval systems, and I would be interested in knowing more specifically what the regulatory changes you would propose in doing. And can you discuss the Australian model and how it's affected their services in rural communities?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that. I happen to know the Australia Post CEO very well. In fact, he came in by Zoom at our latest board strategy session in Montreal to share some of his learnings with us. And I'll just say that they've been able to, in their country, get a little more flexibility around their operating model, their delivery model. Flexibility, I'd say if there's one key word that I want to leave you all with today, it's flexibility. But let me just say this, our operating model was built back in the day, really in the last century. That sounds a little dramatic, but it was built for a paper-based economy, almost pre-internet, and that is holding us back. And so I would say right now, and forgive me for this terrible analogy, but we are driving a 1967 Chevy in a Formula One race. That's where we are right now, but we're tenacious and we got lots of new parts in the car, but it's a tough one. We need more flexibility to compete. We need more flexibility in how we deliver, weekend delivery, evenings, next day. We need flexibility in our regulatory structure to be able to respond quicker. Flexibility in pricing, which can help us with some of the financing issues that we've had. And flexibility to invest and improve service. Invest more in our people, invest more in safety. So, we've got to continue to modernize Canada Post. It's a wonderful organization that is a platform for change across Canada. People care about it. We know that. And we're in a fight, a dog fight for every parcel out there right now. And we're up against some of the best competitors in the world. I don't have to name them, but they're global icons, both shippers and in terms of e-commerce. So the flexibility we need is along those lines, but it's basically modernizing Canada Post, and I believe we can do it. I think we got the talent, the tenacity, the people to do it.
Can you explain the rural definition, the moratorium? Should it be updated? I mean, obviously that's the biggest challenge that's facing. In the urban centers,
Yeah.
we're okay. I mean, we have a lot of competition, but you have a lot of concentrated population to make it worth your while.
Yeah.
So explain to me what it is. How do we stay true, in essence, to the intended purpose of the rural definition, the moratorium, and what is it that we're going to do to make it better?
A great question, a really important question. So the moratorium, as you know, has been in place for 30 years, since 1994. A lot has changed, as I mentioned earlier, in Canada. I won't repeat that. But many of the post offices in that moratorium, the list was created by the government at the time, not Canada Post. And a lot of those that were rural at the time are now very much in urban areas. And I'll just pick a couple. Stittsville outside of Ottawa was very rural, is very suburban now. Richmond Hill, Milton. These areas were rural at the time. They're sure not rural anymore. So the moratorium is protecting those post offices, which typically have another service, franchise service nearby within a couple kilometers. So there's quite a few of those in Canada now. So my concern around that is that, that may be stopping us from getting the right resources out to the rural areas where we need it even more. Because you're well served in the urban areas and unfortunately well served by our competition, who is essentially cherry picking the top 7 cities in Canada. They basically stay in that lane within 200 miles from the U.S. border, the top 7 cities, and don't really, we actually deliver some of their product north. And we go north. We go everywhere every day. So
I'm sorry, Mr.
we're getting cherry
we're
picked
past our time. I have to cut you off. It was an interesting answer. And Mr. Seuss, I appreciate your opening comment. It was interesting to hear.
Yeah.
Mrs. Vignola, but before we start, colleagues, if you could just watch the clock and try and get your question out with the appropriate time for Mr. Edinger to answer. Thanks very much.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will do so. My colleague earlier spoke briefly about Australia, which is a country, well, it's a continent, of course, in and of itself. And it has a lot of rural areas, rural communities. When you were talking earlier about international examples, there was Australia, of course, but there is also the UK. What are the conclusions or maybe linkages that we could make between us and Australia? And can we learn from their successes? And can we avoid their errors?
Yeah, excellent question. Australia, as I said, and to Mr. Souza's question, I didn't fully answer it. I'm talking to the CEO of Australia continuously. In fact, I'm going to be seeing him in a few weeks, and we joke that we're very similar countries. We have snow, they have sand. Otherwise, we have a lot of similarities. But also we have a lot of empty space too. Again, the whole density, the population density in Australia is actually lower than Canada. We're 2 of the lowest in the world for population density. They're 3 people per kilometer. We're 4 per square kilometer. So we have the same challenges. So it really, and if you look at most of the G7 countries, and again, I meet with them continuously, they're all struggling with the very same issues. We compare notes, we're talking about all these things. So, one of the things in Australia is they've been able to use electric vehicles quite well in that marketplace. They've been able to develop a pricing structure with their government that works quite well to generate funding so that they can have the funding to turn around the company. And so that's worked well. IT, I was on the phone, honestly, last night with Australia on IT in terms of, because IT is really behind the scenes, a really big factor on e-commerce. We're connected to every retailer in Canada. So if that isn't right, the shipment doesn't happen, there are problems with the customer. So it's the behind the scenes hero in all of this. And they were asking us for our learnings on some of the changes we've made to bring IT in-house, to get world-class IT, to get it right in close with our business units to make sure we're working together. So we're helping each other
Thank you
all the time.
very much, sir. Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Edinger, you mentioned I believe you called them multinational e-commerce giants that are eating Canada Post's lunch in the big urban areas, and that you deliver their stuff to the north, to rural communities, to remote communities. Now, what's happening in the communities I represent is that people are trying to order things online because there are very limited retail opportunities in communities of 100 people, and they are getting gouged for shipping costs to rural places. So these global multinational e-commerce giants they're getting a deal. You're giving them a bulk deal because they ship so much stuff with you, and then they're marking the products up to the point where the shipping can cost more than the product. People on Haida Gwaii are having to spend, $150 to get a small order from an office supply company. This is absolutely wrong. And I'm not suggesting that this is the doing of Canada Post, but they're using your postal codes to determine which communities to gouge. How do we stop this? What's the role of the federal government in stepping in and saying, you know what, it's absolutely unacceptable that you're forcing rural residents in remote communities, residents in Canada's north, to pay through the nose for a service that our government is providing using a Crown corporation funded by taxpayer dollars. Yeah. How do we address this?
Excellent question. I'll just say that, again, from our standpoint, the focus is on service. And we've recently, just as one example, working with Indigenous communities as well. We've upgraded something like 45 post offices in the last year or so. We've built 4 new community hubs on First Nations land. I'll come to it.
Okay. 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be quick.
Okay.
And we just opened a brand new post office in Iqaluit, the number 2 post office, all about service.
But none of that addresses the problem I just mentioned.
Right. And so I think that's the purview of the government to figure out I'd certainly be happy to provide input on that. Our job is to serve the north, serve remote, serve it the best way we can. And as I said earlier, charter flights at our cost, which we should be doing, to the north to make sure they have these products. They don't have a lot of choice, and that's concerning to me. It's high cost, but that's outside of my bailiwick, in my opinion. I think government should look at that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Genuas, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. And just to sort of clarify the structure that you operate under, right? So you're the CEO of Canada Post, which means that you exercise a lot of authority over operations, but you're ultimately constrained by policy that's put in place by the government. You've talked in general terms about modernization. I'd like to challenge you to be as specific as possible. Let's imagine a world in which you didn't have the kinds of constraints that you have as a result of working within a Crown corporation, or that you could actually do whatever you thought best to restructure the company. Could you tell us specifically, what kinds of more innovative and even radical measures you would undertake if you didn't have those constraints along the lines of modernization?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. Again, I'll go back to what I talked about earlier. The market has changed so much. Expectations of Canadians and customers have changed so much. Even coming out of COVID, with all these new upstarts, it's changed the game completely. So they are much more flexible than we are. They're 24/7. I got a delivery on my street, not for me, on Easter Sunday, Labor Day Monday. These players, which are low cost, non-union players, are just much more flexible than us. So I would, again, come back to the word. I'm sorry, but the word is flexibility. We need more flexibility on how we deliver. All of our competition is doing weekend delivery. Right now, we're the only ones that aren't. That has to change. We're talking to our bargaining agents about that right now, and that's those negotiations are underway, so I can't talk about that any further. But
Just to probe that point specifically, how would weekend delivery reduce your costs? It would seem on the face of it that would increase your costs.
It'll grow revenue.
Okay.
A weekend right now is not huge, but it's going to be. It's become the norm. If you remember when we opened Sunday shopping many years ago.
Would that involve charging more for weekend delivery then, or would it involve the same
Not
rate?
necessarily, but when you're dealing with customers who it's so important that their end consumer gets that product quickly, even if it's on Saturday morning or Sunday night. So
people would be more likely
us.
to work with you as opposed to others.
That's it. You've got to be in that game. You've got to be competitive. You've got to be flexible.
Okay.
And
what else? What other kinds of radical changes would you consider?
Well, look, there's so many innovative things. We look and continue to look at all the things that are happening around the world. Parcel lockers. We're adding technology right now to the community mailboxes to let people know when there's something in there, so you don't have to drive up and check and hope there's something there. So there's a lot of technology that we can bring to the table that can change the game for us in terms of better efficiency, better customer engagement, all those things. So there's so many possibilities. I'd say pricing as well. We need a pricing structure model that enables us to get reasonable pricing based on where inflation is on an annual basis, so we don't have to go through that whole process. Other countries are now doing that. They're setting up models whereby you work to a calculation each year based on inflation and other costs. The United States, for example, which is really new, they now get 2 opportunities for price increases every year. And they were notoriously low price stamps, lowest in the world. They're about to go right past us pretty quickly. And they're using that as a way to turn around their company in the United States, as one example.
Mm-hmm. And for making these changes, the process then, taking you out of that imaginary world where you get to make all these decisions yourself, are you bringing these kinds of ideas to the government? What kind of response are they giving you on the weekend delivery piece, on the price piece?
Well, weekend delivery is something we have to work out with our bargaining agents. So, but we have constant conversations with the department, PSPC. I'm talking to the minister on a regular basis, his deputy minister. So the communication lines are very good, but we have not been able to align on all the right solutions. But we know I'm not saying we're perfect or we may have missed a couple of things, but we know what's going on around the world and we know what's working.
Yeah, just in terms of aligning, I mean, I understand that the minister may not agree with you on certain particulars, and obviously that's the minister's prerogative. It's the minister's responsible ultimately to the people of Canada for the decisions that are made. But it seems like the lack of approval for the strategic plan going back years and years. It seems like there's a problem of being able to make a decision on any kind of direction from the minister. How do you explain that, the lack of approval on a strategic plan, that seeming ongoing misalignment, the failure to kind of identify solutions between Canada Post and the political decision makers?
Yeah, thank you.
I am sorry to interrupt, but there's no time left for an answer, but perhaps the next round for the Conservatives, you can take time then.
Just hold on to that.
Go ahead.
You can answer my next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Mr. Edinger, Madam Fortin, and Madam El-Haj joining us today. I'd also like to echo my colleagues in recognizing our hardworking postal workers who serve our communities across Canada, and in fact, a childhood friend of mine who's nearing his 25 years of service, Paul Baya, is a beloved member of our community in Richmond, British Columbia, and he's coached over 3,000 kids, youth soccer, and even the dogs love him. So he's and
well,
and I also want on the issue of the stamps, I want to share a really proud moment for the Sikh Canadian community. A stamp was made to celebrate the contributions of the community in 1999, and it was a very proud moment for the community. So thank you again for recognizing that. My question is around the greening government strategy. The approach to meeting or exceeding national climate objectives in its own operations, reducing the climate environmental impact of federal government operations, supporting the sustainability goals, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, resilience of assets, services, activities through climate adaptations. So as part of this strategy in its operations, to be net zero by 2050,
Yes.
has Canada Post taken any measures to reduce its emissions and improve the sustainability of its organization? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Thank you for that question. Another great question. Yeah, we've taken it extremely seriously. It's been in our mandate letters, and we've embraced it as an organization. It's an important part of our brand. And I'd say we've made a good progress, but we're on a journey that is a long journey, so we're nowhere near where we need to be. I will say a couple points of evidence of that are the Albert Jackson Processing Center, which is very much a green certified building for its size in Canada. It's a huge facility, but it has solar panels on the roof. It has electric charging stations, et cetera, et cetera. We scorecard and monitor and are working on a number of programs around our environmental performance. We brought down our Scope 1 and 2 GHG emissions by 17% last year, so we have actual numbers, and it's on my scorecard in terms of progress. We launched a new product last year called Carbon Neutral Shipping, and it's basically ground shipping, which still emits carbon, but it's a lot less than other alternatives. So we're very pleased with those, and we've been recognized by a number of bodies for our actions, not just our talk, our actions in that regard in terms of the environment. And as I said, it's an important part of our brand, something we're committed to, but at the same time, we got to get the financials, and the financials concern me deeply, and we got to bring them into line, and we intend to. But on the ESG, environmental side, we're pleased with where we are.
Is that impacting, say, the fleet in any way?
Thank you. We have one of the largest fleets, if not the largest in Canada. People may not realize that, about 14,000 vehicles. We've committed to converting those to electric by 2040. And we've started to phase them in a small way. We got a long ways to go, but we're very pleased with that so far. But we're learning a lot on that. The big thing with electric vehicles is the infrastructure. You have to get the infrastructure in properly, and there's a lot of learning there. We're learning as we're going, but we're very committed to that. Yes.
Thank you for that. And with respect to the rural and remote communities, and the Indigenous communities who we know often live in a lot of these rural communities, the need to ensure access and the range. Canada Post recognizes this obligation as part of its commitment. Can you explain how Canada Post approaches reconciliation?
Yeah.
About 25 seconds, please.
Oh, God. We launched a 5-year strategy in 2022. We're on Indigenous reconciliation. We were the first Crown at the time to do that. As I said, we've already improved 45 Indigenous post offices on their communities, on their First Nations. We got another 25 planned for this year. We have a 5% target on procurement. We're at 4%. We actually have an employee percentage target. We're at 3.3% right now in our organization. We've built 4 community hubs on First Nations land in the last couple of years. Membertou in Nova Scotia, High Prairie in Alberta, Fort Capel in Saskatchewan, and Little Current, which is Manitoulin Island in Ontario. Very pleased with those. And we're working hard on that. And by the way, we've opened 6 new full-service post offices in rural locations since 2022.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Block, please.
That always catches me by surprise. I'm not sure why. Mr. Ettinger, we have seen recent reports in the media that Canada Post is going to have a role in the gun buyback program through the shipping of guns. Now, it's my understanding that Canada Post had previously done a risk assessment of being involved in the gun buyback program, and it was found that there were too many risks for Canada Post to be involved in it. Is Canada Post being pressured to participate in this program, or was there another risk assessment conducted that found there were not as many risks as previously thought?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'll say that, and this is unequivocal, employee safety is our top priority, and for me, it's my clear responsibility to keep our employees safe and the public safe, because post offices are a public location. So we did an internal safety assessment. We were not comfortable with the process that was being proposed in ongoing discussions over the last few months. And so our position is that the elevated risk, we're just not comfortable with. We're not set up. Our buildings are not set up with security, with proper storage. The buildings aren't that secure overall the way I'd like them to be. This is not in our expertise. This should be best left to those that know how to handle guns, know how to dismantle them, know how to manage them so no one gets hurt. It is not something we're comfortable with at all.
Thank you. I'm sure you have communicated that back to those who may be suggesting that you should be. What has the response been so far to that, to the assessment that you yourselves have conducted and the answer that you've come up with?
Well, our position stays the same, but I know there are discussions going on in terms of other alternatives that might make sense. I've always, on any issue, taken an open-minded approach because I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I'll get the right team on it, the right experts that can try to figure it out. So, the discussions continue, but our position is clear based on the approach that was being considered. We're just not comfortable from the elevated risk assessment of that. I would not live with myself if somebody got hurt. So it's almost that simple.
Thank you very much. According to projections prepared for Canada Post by Ernst & Young, Canada Post was projected to have losses of $721 million in 2026. Yet Canada Post has already reported a full-year net loss of $748 million in 2023. So Canada Post has already surpassed loss projections 3 years out, and you've projected that early. How is this sustainable?
It's not. We have to undergo substantial change. The business model, as I said earlier, but I'll take a slightly different angle, has outlived its useful life. I think it worked at the time when it was a letter mail monopoly. The price of letters covered the cost of delivery at that time. And we're able to ride the early wave of e-commerce where we were the only game in town. And, we had excess space at the time. So the early days of e-commerce, we were able to incorporate those volumes. But through COVID, where things changed a lot and with new competition coming in, that business is under attack. Every bit of it. It is a fight. I'm not being dramatic by saying that. So our business model needs to be updated. It is done, finished, and it probably has been for 10 years. And so for us to be competitive, and I'm confident we can be, this is not rocket science in a lot of ways, but you got to have the flexibility to be able to do some of the things I talked about earlier. And in order to basically compete head on with these companies who are great strategists and have done a lot of great things. But we need that flexibility in how we deliver, how we price, how we make decisions, how we operate, how we invest, how we support our people right down the line.
Thanks very much. Mr. Shawari.
I'd like to welcome Mr. Edinger. A number of times in your responses and even in your opening remarks, you talked about that the business model has changed, and you just reconfirmed that it is not sustainable and it needs to take a different approach. And you've highlighted the fact that
there's a misalignment.
Canada Post can compete, but not within the current model. Therefore, we need a different model. And you put flexibility at the heart of the new model. And to the best of my recollection and taking notes, you talked about you need a different model of competition or flexibility in competition. You need flexibility in pricing. You need flexibility in investment. And you talked about flexibility in delivery. And you gave an example of the delivery, talking about evening, weekends. And I'm sure you have looked into an alternative delivery model, which is around drones and around central boxes and around, especially in the urban areas such as Richmond Hill. By the way, thanks a lot for shout out to Richmond Hill. In urban area like that, that model could work very well. Can you give us an example of the investment, the flexibility in the investment, the flexibility in pricing that will be able to help you? Because it looks like with the 5 different recommendations that you have and what you have in mind, all you need is a green light to be able to do this. And for green light, you need partnership. As far as delivery is concerned, you need investment and you need partnership with the postmaster. But can you talk about the investment and you talk about the flexibility you need for pricing?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Bottom line is customers' expectations have changed a lot through COVID. They basically want 3 things right now. They want fast, they want free, and they want flexible. So, the competitors out there have set the bar pretty high. People's expectations are next day delivery. Not so much same day, but next day delivery. So that's the ball game we're competing in right now. Our structure isn't really set up for that. Again, when I talk about weekend delivery, it's something we have to negotiate with our bargaining units, and we're doing that right now. The cost of weekend delivery is prohibitive for us through overtime, quite a large number in order to do that, or we would have done it already. That's one example. Pricing, and in terms of pricing, if you look at other markets around the world, both the UK, Australia, France, even the United States, have been able to work out a pricing approach that is, again, based on a calculation that incorporates inflation, your costs, what else is going on in the economy and the market and so on. And it's right now we've had 2 price increases in the last decade, and we've had none in the last 4 years. So we need that funding in order to support the turnaround strategy that we're trying to execute with the rest of the organization. So those things, and that gets into investments in electric vehicles or investments in centralized mailboxes. You raised that, and by the way, it's the government's clear direction to keep door-to-door delivery where it is today and not expand community mailboxes. We certainly abide by that. We respect that strongly, but the experience on CMBs has actually been quite good over time, in terms of they're secure, they're safe, they're convenient, and they're efficient for the organization.
Yeah, thank you. I got about 45 seconds. I want to go back to the pricing, and you're saying there's only 2 prices increase. And when you're talking about the flexibility of pricing, are you talking about something that's out of your control, out of Canada Post control? It's dictated. Therefore, you can't look into if you want the next day delivery, it's going to be X amount of dollar. 2 days delivery, if you want over the weekend delivery, is going to be that, and you cannot do that.
We can price price our parcels in e-commerce accordingly. It's a competitive market, and we can. What I'm referring to there is letter mail rate increases, which are controlled by government, by GIC approval. Yes.
That's my time.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Thank you, Chair. A few days ago, we learned, and I'm just going to ask my questions seriatim and quickly because I only have 2.5 minutes. We learned that there was a fraud around the small loans program. That fraud, I want to know, was it internal, external, the amount of the fraud, and how can Canada Post recover the sums of monies involved? Second question, you said that Canada Post needs more flexibility and also you have to compete with non-unionized parcel delivery services. What can Canada Post do? Is it likely that it can compete, or do you see a union as a way of assuring greater flexibility? What exactly is the present situation between Canada Post and the unions in terms of profitability?
So thank you for those. There's a couple in there. One is you mentioned a fraud with a bank program. Could I ask which program was that, just so I can be clear in my answer?
It was the Sandbox program, the Sandbox program for micro loans. It was a few months ago.
About 30 seconds, so perhaps you can answer one and respond in writing to the other question.
Yeah, I'll answer the first question, and we'll get back to you on the other. We launched a program in late 2022 with the Toronto Dominion Bank as our partner. We piloted it, and then we launched it nationally. Their security folks were very good and picked up on some irregularities very, very quickly. We suspended it immediately and did a full review and decided as partners not to go forward with the program. But, there were a lot of learnings from that, and we're committed to developing more financial services for rural and remote areas, most importantly, going forward.
Thanks very much. Ms. Matheson, welcome to OGGO. I'm afraid you only have 2.5 minutes, but please go ahead.
I'll see what I can do, Mr. Chair. So, as I understand it, and I am new to this conversation, not so new, I guess, to the overall, that Canada Post is going to be proposing the reduction potentially to 3 days a week postal delivery. Now, as I understand it, the union CUPW is actually arguing that instead of looking to that to save money, you consistently talked about that current past business model not working, the flexibility that you need, the expansion, going in an entirely different direction would be the expansion, expanding out and working with the union to ensure that the program that they've had on the books for so long, delivering community power, would look at that expansion, showing the need of Canada Post in terms of postal banking, elder check-ins, community hubs, those charging stations, all of those things. So is that part of the negotiations that you're in now in terms of that change that you're looking to make?
Thank you. Some good questions there. Well, the first thing to stress is we are in active negotiations with CUPW right now, so I can't say too much. But I will say this. Alternative day delivery is not on the table with them. It's not something we're looking at. We understand the program. It actually, at first glance, when you look at it, you say, well, why wouldn't it be reasonable to deliver 2 days a week or 3 days a week? The issue is our network is a collapsed network that carries parcels, direct mail, and letters together. So think about the letter carrier. Even if we only delivered letter every second day, letters, we still have to go through the route, because to be competitive in e-commerce and parcels, we have to be there every day. In fact, the answer to this now, and it does dovetail with what you said, is we need 7-day delivery. That's what we need. We don't need fewer days, but it's mainly to compete on parcels, because that's where that market is.
So it is my understanding that it is my understanding that. Sorry, mic issues. It is my understanding that the union is entirely open to that suggestion, and they're willing to work with you on that. So again, in terms of that expansion, are you fully looking at expansion? I mean, even food delivery, as we've seen, and that competition that you're talking about from those smaller businesses, it would help with that.
Yeah, and we're
sorry, I have to interrupt. We haven't left any time for an answer, I'm afraid, but perhaps.
I have mic issues.
Sorry, but perhaps you could get back to the committee in writing for some of the issues brought forward.
Absolutely.
And actually, while we're talking about that, the committee has passed a motion that requests everything back within 21 days for such information. We'll go to Mrs. Kusi, and then we'll finish this round again with Ms. Atwin.
Much appreciated. Mr. Ettinger, I'm sure that Canada Post believes in the importance of privacy for Canadians, and of course, as you have mentioned several times over, you are here to serve Canadians, and I'm sure you want to responsibly act on your mandate. But I'm just concerned about your decision to fulfill your mandate in taking the personal information of Canadians without their informed consent and selling it to third parties. What words can you please provide Canadians with to ensure them that you are ethically fulfilling your mandate while disagreeing with the recommendations set out by independent officers of Parliament, please?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's an important question. So I'll start off by saying the trust of Canadians when it comes to privacy is second to none. We take that very seriously. We announced some changes to our Smart Mail marketing program, I guess it was the end of February, following a concern, one complaint that came through the Privacy Commissioner. And we've made a number of changes related to that are already effective. One is no longer offering aggregated online shopping trends at the postal level for retailers to review. We've discontinued using data from publicly available directories combined with our own operational data to validate an incomplete address. And in that case, we've stopped doing that, but we're only trying to make the service better. And we're working hard to increase the transparency and awareness of our direct mail marketing program so that people know how to opt out of it if they want to opt out. And we're doing that through online, social media, in our post offices, and so on. So we continue to work with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. We have a good ongoing dialogue with him and his team, and we respect the Privacy Act to the nth degree, and will continue to respect it going forward.
Thank you very much for that response. My next question, Mr. Ettinger, is does Canada Post keep track as to who they are selling Canadians' private information to?
Well, we, as I said, we treat data in a very, very careful and protected way. It's in our database, which is protected within our four walls. And essentially, we help businesses ensure that their lists are up to date and accurate for delivery, but we very, very much protect and adhere to the Privacy Act as we're going through that process. And again, we've made a number of changes based on the review of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner that I'm told, and I cannot speak for them, but I'm told that we have reached an area where we're comfortable that we've made the changes that we need to make to deal with that very important issue.
So then I'm hopeful that this information guarantees that this information is not going to bad actors to target Canadians.
No.
Excellent. And can you guarantee that this information is not being sold to other countries who could
No.
use this information to interfere in Canada's democracy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. I'm very happy to hear that. Mr. Chair, with the time I have left, I'd like to put a motion on notice, please. Okay, thank you. That the committee report to the House that it condemns the stealing of mail. That's the motion. Thank you. Correct. Yeah, I'm putting it on notice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edinger. Thank you, team.
Go to Ms. Atwood, please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to close out our discussion this afternoon or this evening. I guess it's quite late now. So thank you so much for being here and answering our questions. I really want to circle back to the community hub pilots that are happening. I was only aware of 2 locations, so really excited to hear that it's now 4. Specifically, of course, I'm familiar with the Member 2 Nova Scotia one. It's close to my neck of the woods in New Brunswick. And it offers an expanded range of products and services, things like parcel lockers, which you mentioned, self-serve, contactless induction of items to be mailed, access to financial services, the Canada Post My Money loan, remittance services, foreign currency exchange, check cashing, ATMs, also small business support. So there's a mention of rentable meeting rooms, public wireless internet access, and access to computers. So this is remarkable to me, especially at a time when we're talking about, there are other closures that we're seeing, or other rural communities that are not seeing these kinds of investments or this kind of, I think, energy put into modernizing or meeting the needs of a community. And so I'm just curious, what's the process? How did this happen, and how can we ensure that this expands?
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, you're right. Member 2 is probably the closest one to you. You're in Fredericton, I believe. Great city, by the way. And we're so proud of those 4. As I mentioned, Member 2, High Prairie, Alberta, Fort Capel, Saskatchewan, and Little Current, which is Manitoulin Island. The key thing on those is we engaged the local First Nations community right at the beginning of the project. And we wanted them to design the post offices with their culture in mind, with their artifacts, with their artwork, with their, color palettes and so on. And you missed one thing on the list, though. They have a podcast center in Member 2. So the whole idea behind that is to make them more relevant in like a community gathering spot, where you got Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, you got resources for small businesses. It's really to help those small businesses connect with one another, network with one another. I was there with Chief Terry Paul when we opened Member 2. He was so happy about it, so was I. And we're monitoring those results, and we're learning from them, and we're trying to adjust. And Iqaluit is another example of that, where part of the intent for Iqaluit was for small business there too, so that they can, when you're starting a small business, it's a lonely venture. You may know that. And they need all the help they can get. So we can put them in touch with BDC, we can put them in touch with lawyers, whatever they need. We want to be the resource that really adds value. And that's our vision for the post office of the future, that it's got more stickiness. We're adding more value for these entrepreneurs.
And are there additional costs incurred by the community for these extra services? And are there new builds, or these existing kind of constructions?
They're a little bit of both, but Member 2, for example, was a new build. I think Manitoulin was a new build. Iqaluit is a new build. The others were refurbishment, but you wouldn't know it. I mean, it's brand new looking and very different than what it was before. But again, the idea is selfishly for us to build loyalty with those small businesses. Sometimes those small businesses turn into big businesses, and we want to be part of that journey. We want to help them. And we have a program called Solutions for Small Business. We have 500,000 members that are all small businesses. So we're trying to tap into those folks and connect to the community hubs.
Excellent. And we also mentioned a little bit about, how Canada Post is looking at, carbon offsets, for example, and kind of really taking responsibility for the climate crisis. And I'm sure, there's also, the impending impacts that we're already dealing with. And so I'm looking at some of the issues around, service interruptions that occurred last year because of floods or forest fires, how long they lasted, the costs that were associated with this. We also noticed that, of course, in Lytton, BC, that it disrupted service. So what kind of mitigation plans are in place as far as, preventative measures or being prepared for these kinds of emergencies?
Wonderful question. Unfortunately, it's really good question, but I'll let Manon answer that. That group and her operations team are the ones on the ground that deal with that.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for the question. So being in thousands of communities across Canada means that we're exposed to what the community is exposed as well, and that can come through the form of extreme weather events. It could be a wildfire and other, and we have become really good at finding, well, first keeping our employees safe, and then being as quick as possible to provide contingencies for the Canadians who live in those communities to still be able to receive their mail and to restore service as quickly as possible.
That's my time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Alwyn. Right on time. What is this? Thank you very much. Mr. Edinger, pleasure to have you with us for the first time. But before you pack up, I just have a couple quick things, if you don't mind. First of all, I'm glad Mrs. Block, and I appreciate that you've brought up so much about the rapid change that's been happening over the years. I was part of this study 8 years ago, and it's funny, Ernst & Young with their forecast was quite loudly denounced